So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Page Chewing, hosted by the wonderful Steve Talks Books and myself. Honored to be here. And we were just saying before the broadcast that this continues what we've dubbed Page Touring All-Star Weekend, somewhat of a marathon. It started on Saturday, interviewing the wonderful Mark Timoney and Thomas Howard Riley, and then this morning at 7 a.m. we had Zamil Akhtar and some amazing bloggers made between the pages, Taylor and Laura Lullabies, Lana. And now to wrap up this momentous weekend, we have two incredible authors and SPFBO finalists, one current and one former, in Angela Boord and Krystal Matar. So welcome and thanks so much. We're honored to
Thank
have
you
you.
very much for inviting us on. It's always a lot of fun to do this, especially with friends.
Yeah, yeah. It is amazing. I obviously, you two have both been are pretty well known in the writing community for your works and for the wonderful people you are. But for the rare person that isn't familiar with your work or about you both, would you like to introduce yourselves and just say a bit about your work and anything else you'd like to say?
I'll let Angela go first. Oh,
Oh,
we can't hear you, Angela. Oh,
Oh,
technical difficulties.
Okay, now?
there you
Yes,
go.
now.
Yes. Okay, good. This headset's been giving me trouble for last week at QuaranCon. It didn't work either, so hopefully it won't do anything else. But I'm Angela Boord, and I was a SPIFO 5 finalist with Fortune's Fool, which is, yeah, Crystal's got it right there. Thank you very much. And it is, Fortune's Fool is kind of a twisty, Renaissance-inspired, kind of epic romantic fantasy. I'm also writing something which is a little bit darker, and it's a portal fantasy, and that'll be out this hopefully this summer sometime. It's called Through Dreams So Dark. So that's kind of me and what I write.
It's really good. She won't say
That's,
it, but I
I'm
will. It's really,
working on
really
it.
good.
It's been my problem child for a long time, but hopefully soon.
You're almost there.
Yeah,
I'm
getting
reading
there.
it. I'm reading
Yeah,
it while
she
she's
is.
doing a revision, and it's just like I can't wait for this thing to hit.
I
It's gonna be good.
boy, I
It
hope
toes
so.
the line in the grim dark, I think.
Yeah, it does a little bit, I think.
It's a bit darker than Kira's story. I guess I should
Yeah.
introduce myself. My, I'm Krystal Matar. I wrote Legacy of the Brightwash, which is I'm calling it romantic grimdark. So it's a little bit bleak and a little bit heavy and a little bit rough around the edges, but also there's a core of hope and love that hopefully balances it out for most people. Um, and it's a SPIFFO finalist this year. So anyone who wants to check that out should definitely check out the leaderboard and see how tight that leaderboard is. Nobody knows who's gonna win. And I'm working on the next book, um, Legacy of Brick and Bone, that should be coming out eventually, but we'll see when.
Yeah, it's amazing. Oh, questions already.
pages are meant to be read, not chewed. I disagree. And, and he has both of your books in ebook form.
Oh,
Oh, thank you.
thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah, very, very popular books. Before I forget, I would be remiss. So on our podcast this morning, both Lana and Taylor want to pass on that they are fangirls of both of your
No.
works,
Oh
and
no.
maybe between
Wow.
I'm pretty sure Taylor is currently reading Legacy of the Brightwash,
Mhm.
Oh
and
well.
yeah, they both want
I'm
to pass on that they're big fans.
I whenever
And
whenever I hear that someone's currently reading it, I feel compelled to apologize for all the things that I'm about to do.
yeah, they and Lana wanted to mention that she backed the Kickstarter for Alchemy of Storm.
Oh,
Oh,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank
So
you very
for
much,
which
Lana.
is which is maybe you two can speak about that as well. So
Yeah, the Kickstarter. So Virginia McLean, who is a force of nature and a wonderful person, put together an anthology, and the theme was grief, and hope in science fiction and fantasy. And so that, as soon as she said it, and I guess that was over a year ago now that she started,
Yeah.
because I don't think I was even published yet, and she trusted me. um, or I guess I'd published a short story, but not a novel. But anyway, yeah, she got us all on board, and she put together just that amazing theme that really seems to be resonating with people, as we saw by how quickly we funded.
Yeah.
And we're due to start producing copies this autumn. So that's going really well. Angela's story is great. I'm
Yeah, well,
contractually obligated to say that.
Krystal's story. The stories are really amazing.
Yeah,
and
they
that
all.
did a really amazing job. So it's been exciting to work on it too, because it's just like when you're involved with that many other writers kind of pulling toward the same goal,
Yeah.
and just the energy has been really great. So
Yeah. Yeah, just the shared enthusiasm, and indie fantasy and indie science fiction is such a community driven vibe to begin with, but then once we all got our hands into the production of this anthology, it just boosts that up quite a few levels, and that's been really really amazing to be a part of. So thank you very much to Virginia McLean and to everybody else writing. Yeah.
Yeah, Virginia McLean is a complete force of nature, a fantastic author in her own right, and she does, she's so involved in the writing community. She's an SBFPC, the self-published science fiction fantasy blog of Judge. She's a former SBFBO, I believe, finalist and semi-finalist. She's the caliber of her writing is outstanding. I read at least one of her books, and it was great. Sarah's Claw. I plan to read the rest of her books, but just the caliber of all the writers involved in your anthology, just through the roof. Like, wow, talk about an all-star lineup. So hats off to you. And apparently, correct me if I'm wrong, you've already sold out of the pre-order copies that are, is that correct? Like, or do it, or
I don't remember. I think what we did was we will produce a limited number, and we sold some of them directly through Kickstarter, and then the rest will be available through Broken Binding once they're all done. So there are some available, and they'll go up for grabs eventually, but the way things are going, I don't think they'll be there long. So definitely once they're ready at Broken Binding, we'll be making a lot of noise to get them moving.
Oh yeah, we'll be all behind supporting that. Wow, what fantastic. Just congratulations on that kind of success. Even just getting the thing funded is a huge success.
That was an interesting day. We weren't sure what to expect, and then we kept watching the pledges come in, and we're like, wow, that's amazing.
I don't think anybody did anything else that day.
No, we were just watching the numbers turn over.
And it's something like 36 hours that we got to 100% funding. Like it was, and like we were getting ready to launch it, and Virginia was saying if we could get to whatever the number was, like 20% in the first day, usually that means the math means that you'll fund. And so we were like crossing our fingers for 20%. And then 20% was pretty easy. It turned out well, I guess. I mean, they did a lot. There was a lot of work behind the scenes. I don't want to make it sound like it was easy, but it just flew so fast, and people were so incredibly supportive.
Yeah, we were floored by the support.
Yeah, that we had February to fund, and we were wondering if we would make it, and then we did.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah, hats off to you guys. That's amazing. So so I mean, on top of your own work, which for both of you, which has been very successful. To have something like that, that's a big deal. I guess I also want to pose a question to you both that we had Holly Tinsley and Tim Hardy, current finalists as well, on one of Steve and I on one of the page chewing episodes. And how have you found, for Angela in the previous Spitfo and Krystal now, how did you cope with, Angela, and how are you coping with Krystal with the immense spotlight and pressure and like how do you deal with the hype and waiting for those reviews to come in and the highs and lows of an amazing review and the potentially a review that's not as favorable, and just how do you deal with all that?
Honestly, for me, it kind of goes back to Virginia again. So because Virginia was one of the finalists in my year, and she got all of us together in a chat because originally the idea was that we were going to have a sale. So we were just coordinating promo for the sale, but it just kind of took on a life of its own. The chat did. And so then we all had each other for support. So we were all kind of together, propping each other up when the reviews came in that weren't so great, and there to cheer each other on when, the good ones came in for anybody. And that was that helped, like when you feel like you're alone, it's a very different experience. So when you feel like you have a lot of other people around you and your friends and stuff, then that's a little bit easier to be kind of under the microscope all the time, because I think and for me, I'm kind of I'm a very strong introvert. So being out there in the public eye for a long time was hard, and it was hard on us, I think, also to write, especially in the last month, the April. Well, it was May for us, I think, but that's the hardest time, the end of the finals, because that's when we went into the last 3 weeks, we had 40 reviews to go, and that was and it was the beginning of the pandemic, and everybody was a little frazzled. So, I mean, that was tough, but yeah, I don't know. And then now it just seems like it seems like they're, I can look at the finals now and have flashbacks a little bit, because it seems like it's the same thing. Like it's all coming down to the wire.
Yeah. Definitely it's a similar feeling where it was Fletcher that put together the Discord group for us, and we all kind of huddle there and check in on each other, and it's that feeling of community. We're all weathering the same storm, so when things are getting stressful, we get it, and it feels like we're playing on the same team, where we're all kind of representing indie fantasy this year, or those of us are published in other years, and it's really good to tap into the community of people around you who are going through the same things. And it's challenging. I think for me, the hardest part was taking part in Spiffbo while I was trying to write the sequel. I think if I was further along in the series, it would have been easier to compartmentalize. And certainly I've gotten there, and I'm glad that I did it. But at first there was just this weird feeling of adjusting to, I'm going to publish one day and, oh, look, my book is out in the world. Oh, look, there's a lot of people reading it. I was not expecting this. and then also to add on Spiffbo on top of that in the same year, it felt like a lot, like I was jumping through a lot of levels really fast. And that was challenging to kind of readjust how I was viewing myself as a person in the public eye, and as a writer, and as a creative person. And so I had to spend some time just kind of deciding why I'm writing, and what stories I'm trying to tell, and I'm just going to go forward with those stories. Um, and I'm glad I did it, because it was definitely um, an an incredible experience as far as community building and coming to understand my audience, and like who I'm resonating with, and watching people understand what we're trying to say is really amazing, especially when we get to share those reviews together and, give each other high fives and just feel that victory. So it's definitely worth it. It's just it's a lot more visible than I was
Yeah.
expecting.
Yeah. It's like
Yeah.
you do it for the visibility to some extent.
Yeah.
Like you put it in there and you're like, well, hopefully the book will get
Yeah.
people see it, and then you're like, wow, there are a lot of eyes on this book. So
Exactly.
so,
Oh no, not everyone's looking
maybe
at
I'll
me.
go hide now. But
Yeah.
because I had sort of a similar experience, and because my
Yeah,
goal was, I launched into SPIFFO. So in my debut, so because it had lived in my closet for a really long time, and then when I decided I was going to go indie, I was like, okay, I have this manuscript, and it's mostly intact, and then I think I can get it ready. And so SPIFFO, the entry was my goal for being done and published. So that kind of drove me through. And then it actually ended up, it was released after I submitted it. So it was like 5 days before the beginning of the competition. And I was not quite expecting it to.
Yeah, I don't think you were expecting to make finalists.
I wasn't actually, because I thought, I wasn't. But I was, I threw it in. I was like, well, it can't hurt. And it gave me a goal to work toward. So
writers are such strange creatures, where we're like, I don't think anyone's going to pay attention to me, but I'll try. And then we get a little bit of success and we go, oh no, people are watching me. People are reading my book. That's really weird. I don't know how to handle this.
Right. And I was, sorry, Krystal.
No, go ahead.
I was trying to write my sequel too. Like when SPIFFO was going on, it was okay until the spring, and when in the finals, when reviews were coming in, that was just a little bit, because you don't know. In ours, like mine, I think I still had 5 or 6 to go. No, it probably was like 5, but toward the end, and I was trying to get this giant book ready for a deadline, and to ship it off to an editor, and then trying to think, like, and it was my debut book, and the reviews were coming in, and when you're getting all those reviews, you're not quite sure what to take out of them to like improve your writing in the longer run, or what's, maybe reader preference or whatever. And so I think my tendency was to like, okay, well, maybe I'll just try to do all of it. And you can't do all of it, so I'm kind of sorting out some of those over, like trying to do it all kind of right now too.
Yeah, trying to please everybody.
Right.
No book can please every reader, and there's certainly the best survival mechanism for visibility is knowing that, for every book a reader, but not for every reader the same book. Like everybody's going to bring their own things that they want to see, that they don't want to see, and you just got to kind of triage through readers and figure out like who's going to go on the journey with you and understand, and then who is just not your audience. And it's okay, because that's just the way art works.
And Lana says, yes, a support system, especially when you're in the public eye like you are.
Yeah. And connecting with people who know what it's like, and it's a great experience. Like, it's absolutely, like, I don't want to sound ungrateful, because truly I'm blown away by how supportive people have been, and how many people have connected with Brightwash. But even still, like for someone who doesn't like to be perceived, I've now become hyper perceived, and it's just such a strange thing to get your mind around. And it's amazing, and I'm so glad I did it. But being around people who understand how that, you have to adjust to just thinking of yourself differently, is really, really helpful. And that's why writer friends, and people in the community are so incredibly valuable. Just to, writing is not a solitary hobby. It's an act of investing in a community. And so, find your community, and you're, you're gonna make it.
And I think that's why, people, I think, have this idea that if you're self-published, it means that you do every single thing, you're like, and you are responsible for for overseeing, but you can't do it by yourself, and you shouldn't, like, and that's what I think is so the best thing about Spiffbo is the community it fosters. Like, just you enter your book and you're suddenly part of a whole bunch of people who are just doing the same thing you are. You're all in it together, and you make new friends, you find new books to read. It's that's the best thing about it, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's incredible too how I recall I was still a lurker when Angela's book was coming out. I was still kind of creeping, looking like, thinking about writing, ready to, but not really involved in the social media aspect of writing community. But I recall specifically that back then I had rarely seen a book, an indie book, because I was just starting to understand what indie was. And I'd rarely seen a book so hyped before it came out. And it's so weird to see the exact same thing replicated with Krystal's book. I had never seen an indie book so hyped before it came out. And it's just, like, what a pair, like, it's just so unique to have that happen. And you two are obviously friends. But when I look as an outsider at your journey, it almost mirrors one another in terms of Spiffle. And like, I just keep hearing about Fortune's Fool. Everybody on social media was talking about Fortune's Fool. And then when Brightwash, Brightwash. And I, how is that? Like, I mean, before the book's even out, people are heralding your books as the book of the year in the indie sphere.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that? Like, I don't, wow.
I didn't notice it was happening really until until a little ways in. Like I didn't realize that I was building a community on Twitter, because a lot of people will tell you that Twitter is not marketing. It's not a marketing tool. But I think we're proof positive that that's not the case, because I haven't done anything else. So I had no idea that it was happening. And then when I started sending out arcs, I was like, okay, the stats say you sell like 100 books in your first year and 500 books over the lifetime as an indie publisher. So, okay, that's fine. I'll grind, I'll make it happen. And those are not the stats I've seen, and I did not expect it. And so that's why, I have to chalk it up to how amazing the community is for supporting me so 100%. And yeah, how do I navigate it? I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. I'm trying, I want to plug into the community, and I want to be available, but I also have to write the next book. So I have to figure out how to balance them both.
Yeah. Well, I was one of Krystal's readers for Brightwash, and so I was pretty confident it was going to be, but I kept trying to tell her, no, look, really, it's good. It's going to, she's like, well, but anyway, it's good. So she worked really hard on it too. It was, I'm really lucky to be one of her readers, because I get to see all this stuff as it comes
How
through.
much it changes.
Yeah, but that's great. I mean, I like that. I get to see all the drafts. So I'm
Yeah,
very
and I got to read Fortune's Full too. Like I think that's pretty much how we
Yeah.
ended up.
Right,
You
'cause
tweeted something about researching soap
Yeah.
these many years ago.
Yeah. Because I didn't have at that point. I was, I think that was like 2018,
18,
right?
I think.
And
Yeah.
so I had just decided to go India, and I didn't know that many people. I had gotten on Twitter because, the advice, if you're going to be a writer and you're going to like find a,
Yeah, you need a platform.
right, you need a platform. And I thought, okay, all right, I'll join Twitter. And then I had met like a few people, but I didn't really have anybody to read my book. I was still trying to fill this out. I was like, I don't know. I know I need editing. I need people to look at this and give me some perspective. So I just tweeted. I was like, hey, anybody want to beta read my giant book? And for some reason, Krystal had seen, like, I had shared this little tiny snippet about soap. And she's like, I'll read your book. And
it was just such a neat world building detail. And like I remember talking to you about how you were researching, what soap, what would be common scents at the time, and how they, what would be a manly,
right,
manly enough for Arsenal.
Arsenal soap.
And it was just so charming, and I was like, well, if somebody puts that much thought into the soap, I got to see what she's doing. And so I got to read that early version when that one needed a lot. That was a long time ago. Well, it just needed pacing. It just needed to. Yeah, like you were almost there. I remember, like I remember thinking, like this is really good, and it just needed to switch some stuff around just to hit the tension properly, and it was a good book. I'm not surprised it's done so well.
It took a lot of work. It took a lot of help too. And
I don't want to minimize how much work you put into it, because even little details on a book that big is a big job.
I couldn't have done it on my own though, so that's, again, it goes back to community and people like helping each other. And then when I was which is funny talking about like how it was talked about and hype, because I had to talk myself into publishing it by saying sometimes if only 5 people buy this book, it will still be worth it. I'm going to do it anyway. And then, I did it. And when I sent out for ARCs, I got up the courage to ask 4 people that I was pretty sure wouldn't like laugh at me and tell me no. So Calvin Park, and because he had interacted on some of my tweets where I'd shared snippets of the book, and he seemed to be waiting for it, and so I was like, hey, do you want to read it? And he's like, yeah. So I gave it to him, and he's the one who wrote the first review, which is actually probably still my favorite. And after that, when people saw that review, then I was like, hey, does anybody else want an ARC? And a bunch of people asked for it. So,
and then Spiffbo.
And then Spiffbo, right.
Yeah. Wow, you two bonded together over soap. That's an interesting little nugget that I'm gonna file. I'm gonna file back there. So that's awesome.
Our writing origin stories.
Stories of and I know Steve's got a bunch of questions too, but one I definitely need to slip in here is that I'm a romance fan. I've read both Fortune.
I like that about you, sir.
Yeah, I'm a hopelessly romantic. My mom, who never published, I told the story on a couple podcasts that she wrote a romance book and she got one reject letter, and that was it. She was done, and it was enough that she wrote it. And I wish she continued. So I guess, for me, that's part of the reason why I'm inspired to write, because my mom. And but I love romance. I love that aspect in fantasy. It's just part of reality. I don't think it's a book is complete without some element of that, and regardless of the genre, right? Because it's just part of life. It's prevalent. Of course, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you both would define your work as fantasy romance. and whew, is it hot? it's steaming. You're gonna, you need a cold shower after you read, your book. So, it's hot. It's smoking. So, what do you find that, because my perception of the larger indie community is that it's really hit or miss when it comes to romance and fantasy. Some people are like, yep, I'm all about it. And some people are like, I don't even want to, just gloss over everything and just, tell me they did the deed and move on. Right. So, yeah. And that's what I've found with, especially with fantasies reviewers specifically. So, I applaud your courage, especially knowing that, a lot of the fantasy reviewers, and I don't want to speak for all of them, but just my perspective is that a lot of them aren't big romance fans per se. So when they read your books, obviously they're going to get a heavy dose of that. So how have you felt about that whole aspect, writing that real, big part of what you love to write, that may or may not be received a certain way by your audience?
I don't know if it was courage on my part so much as just stubbornness. Where I think I knew it was going to be pretty hit or miss, but I didn't want to have to cut away pieces of who I am in order to publish. I felt like if I was going to slice chunks of my identity away, then why bother at that point? So if I was going to make my career out of this, which is the dream, then I wasn't going to do it in half measures, and I would rather do it fully and fail than do it halfway at all. So that that was pretty much it for me, where I didn't feel like if I was going to do this, I was going to do it with all of the things that I'm passionate about and not just pick and mix.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same.
Angela had to talk me through it.
Yeah.
Speaking of how much drafts change, like those details were not in early drafts because I still thought, oh, well, if I want to be taken seriously, I can't write about that stuff. And then I got upset with myself because there's a pretty graphic torture scene in Brightwash. And I was like, why am I okay with writing a man's shoulders getting dislocated, like chicken legs popping out of the socket, but not consensual sex? Like that that made me ask some questions about my priorities. So Angela talked me through it over the course of a couple of weeks, and then I was like, fuck it, we're doing it.
Yeah. And I had my decisions were kind of similar to Krystal's too, because when I started, I had not written for a long time. I started trying to publish back before self-publishing was really a thing, and then I got kind of burnt out on it. And part of the reason why I got burnt out on it was the trying to keep everybody else happy, like trying to second guess what publishers wanted, trying to second guess what would be received and what I could, and it wasn't fun anymore. It was when I was a teenager writing. It was fun. I was doing what I wanted to do, and I didn't really care so much about that. And then I had a bunch of kids, and so when I came back to writing, when I decided I was going to start writing for publication, because I never really stopped, I just didn't really finish things. I promised myself that I was going to write what I wanted, what I like to read, and that what I wanted to write. So, and what I like to read, romantic fantasy. So that was, I decided that, yeah, I knew that sometimes I was more afraid of it than reality kind of bore through, because when I wrote the book, I was not quite sure whether I wanted to call attention to the fact that it was romantic fantasy when I was talking about it, online or whatever. But then I was pleasantly surprised because,
readers pointed out.
Yeah. And they had a good response to it. And then that gave me a lot more courage, I guess, to do, because I was going to write it anyway, but then it was
Yeah.
it's nice to see that some people liked it, you know.
Yeah, that's been my experience too, where it's like I've been pleasantly surprised with people saying that, you know, that maybe it's changed their minds a little bit, or they don't usually, although it makes me sad to think that, you know, they don't usually like it. But I think there's I think people have a lot of preconceived ideas of what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
And so then when they hit something that's written in a way that really resonates with them, they think it's the exception. But I think there's more really great stuff out there than people realize. They just don't seek it out because they don't know they're going to enjoy it.
Yeah, they see that word and then
Yeah.
they're like, oh well, I don't usually like it, so
Yeah.
give it a chance.
Okay, sorry, I'll be quiet so Steve can
No,
answer.
it's fine. I just enjoyed the conversation. I was just curious about Kickstarter. If the experience of the Kickstarter changed your perception of it, and if it's something that you'll try again in the future.
Kickstarter for publishing, yeah. I mean, I didn't get to see how much work went into all the math and all the really scary decisions, but certainly it's proof positive that if you have enough of an audience, you can make this stuff happen. In fact, one of our authors, Intisar, she just funded her Kickstarter that launched a couple of days ago.
Yeah, it takes
She
long.
yeah, she was funding for an audiobook for one of her books. And it again it took about 36 hours to fund. And so I think Kickstarter has built itself a platform where people are looking for books. And I was not aware that it was happening, but certainly people that I don't think we've ever interacted with were finding us through Kickstarter, and then coming on board and then finding us across other platforms. So it's definitely a good tool if you know how to hustle your own ideas.
It does take a lot of work though, and
Yes.
that's the thing that you have to be willing to. I was not involved in the organization aspects as much, but I could watch what was going on on the outside, and like you have to be very committed to seeing it all through. And then if you're committed and you're willing to do all the legwork, I think it's excellent.
Yeah, I and I think what I find the most impressive, especially about both of you, is that is the humility aspect, of the fact that despite the acclaim you've received so far, and despite all the accolades, and despite you're both still, from what I know of you, both very grounded and very humble and very just lovely people. And I, we were talking about this earlier, several podcasts, and we've talked about it on tons, that, imposter syndrome is something that I think lurks for even the most, the most well-known writers. I mean, even now, like for example, I have the privilege of having seeing my book peeking out there on Krystal's shelf, and I feel like I don't deserve to be there because it's mostly all SBFPO finalists, and that's not me, and but I look at the caliber of those books, and I go, wow, and obviously, for both of you, as much as you, of course, it's all about supporting other authors, and you're boosting them. You're rooting for them too. You're co-finalists.
Yes.
You're rooting for them too, and you're rooting for them to win. And you're more or less, I think, from what I know of you, you're both happy to be there. Yeah, of course, hoping to win, but totally satisfied with just making the finals and hoping that whoever wins, you're happy with that because you have so much respect for their writing. But like I know, how do you guys cope with imposter syndrome, like I said, which I think lurks for every writer, when we can't help but compare ourselves to, like, I look at those books on the shelf, I go, oh my God, this, like, those are just, those writers are just,
You're selling yourself short, my friend, and I don't like it. You cut that out. Angela, tell him how to defeat his imposter syndrome.
Well, you get Krystal to tell you to cut it out. Is really what happens. or
Darn, I was hoping she had a good answer.
Or Connor Kaplan to send you some explanations.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, but it's like that too. Like if you've got your friends do help you out, because they can kind of see the reality, and when you're in your own brain, like I guess it was Clayton who introduced Clayton Steiner, the weasels, and it's easy to get them in there, and sometimes you're not sure that it's fear or what you think. Oh, I'm not. I mean, there's always a point when I'm writing a book and I think I am not smart enough to pull this off, and I'm really not smart enough to pull it off. But it's like, so I have to talk myself into it. Like, okay, I'm just going to do it. It's going to be finished, and then once you send it out in the world, it kind of has its own life, whatever. And I'll write the next book, and then the whole process will repeat. But yeah, and I think that too. But when you're going through and you're trying to do stuff, and you're afraid of doing things, or you're like, I'm not good enough to do this, and you're testing your book, and you're thinking, I don't know. And then you kind of come back and go, well, why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I doing it just for, reviews or whatever? Or am I really doing it just because I'm a writer and I like to write the stories? And at that case, then you can go, well, I guess it doesn't matter so much. I'm going to do it anyway. But
yeah. A little bit of stubbornness, a little bit of spite. And then also there's just this feeling that it's like, well, what else am I gonna do with all of these people that live in my head with me?
Driving me nuts,
It's about time they start paying rent.
Right.
But I think definitely that's where the community comes in again, where they can kind of reality check you, and it's like Angela said, it's about why we're here, and it's tempting to compare yourself to other people and how they're doing, but you're not. That journey isn't your journey. That you got to focus on why you're here and what you're trying to say, and if you keep that in your mind, it will carry you through the moments where you feel like you're not smart enough, you're not talented enough, you're not whatever enough, and ultimately we're all going through the same thing. We're all comparing ourselves, and we're all challenging ourselves to get better, and it just has to be about why you're here. And I think keeping that in mind helps.
Yeah. I guess on that note as well, it's funny. I see a lot of posts on Twitter, excuse me, and I had a conversation with a fellow writer the other day that said that, while there's many advantages to being traditionally published, one of the reasons why they personally want to be traditionally published is, frankly, a sense of validation, that they feel that, if they get accepted by an agent and then they get a book deal, then that will be the ultimate, validation of them as a writer, because, the gatekeepers have endorsed the fact that they're good enough to make the grade. I'm not sure if that plays into the way any of you feel, but I've heard this voiced a lot on it, and people are being very candid about this, right? And being very courageous in admitting that, and I respect people for that. Obviously there's many more advantages to being traditionally published, but is that something that could be in the future for Angela Boord or Krystal Matar, if you're willing to talk about it? You don't want to pry, but is that something that you've ever considered that you could be looking at in the future, or?
I I have a hard time knowing for sure because on the one hand I feel like, you know, I make a lot of big statements about um why I'm here, but then on the other hand I am hoping that this is going to be my career. So like it's kind of a balance of what am I going to get versus what can I do for myself. And I wonder at this point where how that balance is going to fall anymore because at this point um, Brightwash is getting ready to break even um, after a really big editing bill, and so I'm published or I've signed a contract with um, Podium, and they're going to produce the audiobook. And by the time that's out, it's thank you very much. By the time that's out, it's going to be profit. And so, what do I gain by trusting a system that I don't know very much about? At this point, I don't know that I'm going to gain very much. And certainly, it will move more copies, but I don't know that I'm in this industry because I want to move volume. I'm in the industry because I just want to be myself. So I'm not really sure. I think I would have to spend a lot of time looking at a contract and being the impossible artist with a million demands before I considered it pretty seriously. But I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. I wouldn't want to say no. I would never consider it ever. If the right thing came along, maybe I would. I don't know, but
Yeah.
you know, at this point, my like the audiobook of Fortune's Fool is with Tantor, so that's like a traditional audio publisher, and that helped immensely because it costs a lot of money to produce an audiobook on your own unless you know,
especially when you write 220,000 words.
Right. So that that was nice with that, and I
I'm
was
going to tease her about it because our books are the same length.
they're exactly the same length. Yeah, they are. Except she put hers in a 6x9, and so it has fewer pages than mine does.
Yeah.
But you know, I get a lot out of when I started writing again, I wasn't sure if I was going to try to go trad or indie, but I was, you know, just thinking about, and I made the decision based on the length of my books was really what pushed me over the edge. But, you know, the time involved in trad publishing, the waiting, everything, I didn't want to take that much. I don't have that much time anymore, so I would rather just get it out. But I wouldn't say no. I like a lot of things about indie publishing. I like the control. I like knowing what it's doing, and it's been more successful than I thought I was going to be. You know?
Yeah.
And so but it is, when you're talking about imposter syndrome, trad publishing does have that stamp of approval. You know, it is the validation that somebody else looked at it and somebody in some kind of authority and said, you know, yes, you can come in, like you can enter the gates. And as an indie, sometimes I think that does feed into imposter syndrome because you're thinking like, well, maybe I think it's good. And even when you get a lot of people who are telling you that your book is good, there's still maybe that little doubt that kind of pops up in your mind sometimes.
For me, when I was revising Brightwash, I at first I did have the intention to try to get an agent and chase trad, and I had, but I was friends with Angela and Clayton and everybody, and so I was watching them go through their journeys, and I was like, okay, well, agents say that, you know, you got to come up with something really polished and it heightens your chance. So maybe I'll start looking for an editor. And then, you know, there's some plot points revolving around Indigenous nations. So, okay, well, before I even start looking for an agent, I'll find a sensitivity reader and I'll work with them. And then as I was going further along the road and doing more and more of these things myself, I was like, well, why am I going to now wait for somebody else to decide yes or no, and then wait for them to find somebody else to decide yes or no when I've already done all these steps. So then I was watching a panel about self-published versus indie, or self-published versus trad, and Dirk Ashton just said it's like the difference between being an entrepreneur and an employee. Both of them have hardships and both of them have victories, and which one suits your personality best. And since I'd already done so much work, I was like, oh, well, I guess maybe I'm an entrepreneur. I guess I might as well just do this myself. So, I mean, that is to say, I get it. I totally understand the desire for that stamp of approval, but there's only so many seats at that table.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to take my chances on a limited thing when I was already putting these many steps in. So it's like, okay, well, I'll just go and see what happens. And certainly it went a lot better than I was expecting. So I guess here I am.
Yeah. I guess feeding into that question, I've read both your books, obviously, loved them both, incredible books. The aspects that stand out for me, specifically with Angela's book, is representation of a disabled protagonist is phenomenally done, handled with extremely adroitly and with sensitivity especially, and with Krystal's book, many things, obviously representation, bisexual characters, etc. Great, but for me, the thing that stands out the most is the protagonist is somewhat of a law enforcement officer, and what he goes through with his journey of realizing perhaps that the rules and laws and regulations that he enforces may be in conflict with his morals, and those are things about your books that have really resonated with me. And they're still with me. I can still recall passages that I go, wow, that really hit home. Like, how have you been finding the feedback specifically about those aspects of your books from other readers, in terms of how they're perceiving it?
I'll let you go, Angela.
Okay.
Yeah. Go.
Mostly it's been, the feedback has been pretty good, and that's something that has meant a lot to me, like hearing from people who do deal with disabilities, who have said this seems pretty realistic, and we appreciated seeing Kira struggle with her disability and keep going. Like, it's not, it's something she has to live with. And even when she does have her metal arm, but it's more, it's not like having her arm that she lost. There are lots of problems that she has with that too. And so yeah, I mean, when I'm writing, I try to be honest about the characters and what they're going through, and that's a big thing with me. I don't want to gloss over things that are hard for them, but I also want to portray them as, I guess I write a lot of characters who get knocked down a lot, but they get back up, and that's, I appreciate it when people tell me that they appreciated that. That makes me feel good.
Well, and you test it too, kind of most memorably with kneading bread with one arm.
Oh yeah, I do. So there's
how much.
My husband thinks I'm funny too, because sometimes I'll do these kind of research things, and so in the sequel I'm writing, she is kind of in a bad way, and she kind of falls out of bed and she's on the floor, and I was trying to think, well, how do you crawl with one arm. And then also I realized with the one arm, like that most stairways have the rails are for right hand. Well, I have a left-handed kid too, so, but they're on the right. So if you don't have a right arm, you can't really, it's hard to like you can't pull yourself up a staircase, like if it's hard to go up a stairway. But yeah, the that was the pizza. I had my copy editor said I don't think she could roll dough with just one arm, and I said okay, I'll try. And so yeah, I made my pizza, and it wasn't the rolling part, it was like holding on to the bowl and stirring it, because you hold on with one arm and stir it with the other. So it's kind of interesting, like all the little details that you don't, if you don't have a disability, you don't realize what kind of small details actually matter a whole lot to you every single day, you know, and they really affect your experience.
I guess I have to answer next. Yeah, for me, it was never a question that Toshua was going to be in that role. Writing him, I've been writing him for, I guess it's 20 years now. Or I don't know, I don't remember how old I am, 19 years. And he's always been a protector. He's always been a father figure and a protector of people who are innocent or vulnerable. And so when I pulled him into fantasy, I knew that had to last somehow, but also I was trying to talk about how hard it is to even see things in a society when, you know, the status quo is built a certain way and you don't always realize why it's been built that way or how it came to be that way. You just kind of go through life accepting that this is how it is, and this is how it is, and this is how it is. And so the journey seemed to make the most sense for him from his nature as a protector being directly in conflict with how he was living his life, where he wants to do what's right for people and to help people, but the nature of his job means that he's doing the opposite. And it's not necessarily a comment on our world so much as a comment on how hard it is to step outside of a system and see what the system is doing, even when you have the best intentions at heart, and even when truly you want to help people and you want to be a good person and you want to have a good impact on the world. And so PL, your review was very emotional for me on that regard, just because I do want people like you to know that I see you and what you're going through, and I appreciate what you're going through, because it's not as easy as we want it to be, and it's not as easy as it should be, and folks like you are trying your best. And I didn't want it to be I didn't want this book to be, you know, a panning of authority figures, because that's not right. You know, men and women are drawn to this industry because many of them are good people and they want to do something good. But sometimes society has built that desire to protect on a foundation that is crooked and off balance, and it's just, we're all just kind of trying our best. So watching people respond to that has been very emotional, and I'm going to get really emotional again.
So am I. I'm trying to hold it in now as you're talking. So
this is becoming my brand on podcasts. I go on podcasts and make people cry. But but it's also a little bit disappointing when people don't necessarily see what I'm trying to say. But that's the nature of art, where, you know, even in art, we can miss our mark, and even in art, a reader or a watcher or anyone won't be ready to go on that journey with you, and that's just the nature of what we're doing. But it makes it worth it for people like you to be following me, and to feel seen.
Thank
Steve's
you
gonna have
for
to
that.
start talking.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
But you know, honestly, no, it's that it's just if one reader,
Yeah.
if that makes a difference to one reader,
Yeah.
that's a huge.
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference to us. Like that, anybody who will say, "Hey, you know, you affected me. You made me feel seen. You got to something in my experience." Is, I don't know. It's a huge privilege as a writer to
Yeah.
tell these stories and have readers connect with them. So, I mean,
Yeah, and you know, to link back to your imposter syndrome question, like that's why that's why I'm here. This is why I wanted to bring my stories to a public platform. I wanted to publish because there were points in my life when I felt vulnerable and I felt less than, and certain books reached across that chasm and made me feel like a person again. And I thought, if I can do that to one person, it'll be worth it. So, um, and you came on board so early. And it gave me armor for all the hard parts. It gave me the courage to keep going. So thank you.
Well, thank you for writing it. Sorry, I wasn't expecting that. So I'm blaming you, Krystal, for doing this. So
I knew as soon as you asked that question, it's gonna be a ride.
Yeah. Just goes to show you the power of, you know, literature and something that's extremely well written and poignant, and how that can affect you. And, you know, for both of you, you know, don't ever think for a moment that what you're writing isn't important and doesn't impact people's lives in a positive way. And you know, I'm extremely touched by both your works, and, you know, yeah, and you know, so thank you for writing what you write and doing it how you do it. So
thank you for being so supportive.
yes, definitely. That matters a whole lot.
Yeah.
You're two people who are very, very easy to support. So very easy to support. So you know, sorry, I'm gonna ask Steve to take over for a second. I have a question, but I can't ask it right now. So
tough to transition, but with a couple of comments. Brady says, "Oh, it's smoking. Sign me up. Adding to my Amazon cart." You don't have to. It's on the shelf here in the other room. So she's in the other room. Connor says, "Hey, that's me."
With exclamation points, of course. Justin.
Thank you, Justin, for your exclamation marks.
Oh, Justin. Justin.
What a clever screen name too.
Yeah, Plothead. Yeah.
Every time I see it, it makes me laugh.
He's awesome. Yeah. Okay, so the one question I was kind of what I want to get to before all that. So more similarities with Angela and Krystal. So I think I said this on we had Thomas Howard Riley and and Mark Timony on there. We're talking about, the whole, love big books and I cannot lie. They write chonkers. I love reading them. I have no problem reading big books and enjoy them, especially if they're well written, and they tend to be extremely immersive. And when they're well done, you can just, you never feel cheated when you have a 200,000 plus page book that is really well done, and you both write that kind of book. Do you find it challenging to write a book of that length, and do you feel like you've both written short stories and more condensed novels, developed type things, but do you prefer writing bigger books? What is it about that length of novel that really gets you going?
Well, I don't know. I just have these ideas and they seem to like explode. Like I think that, I'm going to write a short story, and suddenly I'm writing a 200,000 word novel instead. But I mean, suddenly, but it just sort of
suddenly it just happened.
Right. It's just, I don't know how it happens. I'm the one who's surprised, and everybody else is rolling their eyes going, no, Angela. Gee, we're so surprised. But
yeah, what a plot twist, Angela.
Yeah, right. So, but I don't know. I feel like writers a lot of the times have natural lengths, and my natural lengths seem to be either novella or giant novel, which I
There's
enjoy.
No middle ground, Dave. It's just like
there isn't really. And
you can't even see the other book that I have on the shelf. It just blends in.
Yeah.
Was that Holly's book kind of sandwiched in there?
I've got Us and Fortune's Fool, and then there's tiny little slivers, Smuggler's Fortune, and then
Fortune.
Yeah. So it's kind of a thing. Like I've written short stories. I have a short story out right now this month in this month's issue of Grimdark magazine, which is actually a Kira story. So she's the main character in that one. It's about her mercenary years, and that was stressful. I was like the
4,000 words.
4,000 words, and I think I stressed out more about that story than I do about writing my giant novels, because when I write a novel, I'm like, oh well, I have space and everything. When you write a 4,000 word short story, like, well, I can only have 2 characters or 1 character. It's like you have to put a lot of limits on things, and my ideas just seem to, I guess, proliferate. I have cast of thousands, and I like digging into the characters. I like going kind of deep into the characters, and that gets me a lot of words, I think, when I'm trying to show relationships that maybe have existed for a long time or are complicated. I guess, I don't know. I try not to waste any words. I think that sometimes people think big books are just extra, like if somebody, like if they should cut stuff out of them, that nobody should write a book that long. And then there are people who are like, yes, give us the giant books. So those are my people.
Yeah.
The giant book.
Yeah, I didn't set out with any particular intention. In fact, back when I thought I was going to try to query it, I was really stressed about how big it was getting, and I was thinking I've got to keep it under a certain word count. And so the first draft that I sent to Angela was 143,000 words. And that draft was very rough. It was just kind of me going, is this kind of a story maybe? Could you tell me if any of this works? And Angela sent me back, well, I want more of this and more of this and more of that and more of this person. And she didn't remember Ishmael's name by the end. I was like, oh, that's not going to work for me.
Like,
I know.
The whole story. And I was like, well,
I'm not blaming you. This was me. And so I was like, okay, well, what connects all of this, and what am I going to write? What am I trying to say, and who do I need on the page so that I can say it? And so just kind of filling in those layers, it was just growing and growing. And at first I was really upset about how much it was growing. But I think it's, it's not as much longer than a lot of trad fantasy novels right now. Because I was talking to Sam Hawke at the time about her debut, City of Lies, and she queried it at I think she said 150 or 160,000, and then she published it at 185. So that it's an extra 40,000 words, but like it's certainly fantasy gets to do things that a lot of other genres, fantasy and science fiction, get to break a lot of rules that other genres couldn't even possibly approach. And so it just kind of happened naturally. And then once I decided I was going to self-publish it, I was like, okay, well, I'll just keep going, I guess. I had a couple of scenes here and there, and then it happened to end at exactly the same word count as Fortune Spool.
Yeah.
So.
Wow.
Yeah, that was weird, but yeah. Probably I wasn't the best person to send it to, though, if you wanted to keep it at 140.
Yeah, I don't know why.
I'm not sure I feel guilty about it, though, because it turned out really well.
Yeah, it worked out. But I just wanted to know, like, could this be a book maybe one day? And then Angela's like, yeah, but you need to tell me more.
Yeah,
pretty much that sums it up.
Yeah, it's so funny that like that a lot of authors, that amazing writers that write those chunky books, invariably, if there's going to be a criticism, it's never about the writing, it's about the fact that it's so long. And but like you said, fantasy, I think we get a lot of latitude, fantasy, sci-fi with that stuff. Not with every reader. You don't get a pass with every reader.
No.
Some readers want that tight, nothing extraneous in their minds. 100K, nothing extraneous in their minds whatsoever. I even a review the other day, it was very favorable. I think it was a 4.5. It was like, like it was for The Last of the Atlanteans. He's like, like great book and everything, but I would have liked to see this tighter and cut this out and cut that out. And I appreciate that, and I you're entitled to that opinion, but I wouldn't have cut a thing out, right? And, and I feel like, well, if you gave me that higher rating and you thought that this and this should have been cut out, then I'm good with that. You know what I mean? Like The Last Atlanteans was just around 200,000 compared to Drowned Kingdom, which was about 160. And my personal sweet spot is probably around 200,000 words to 220. But at the same time, I mean, hey, I've loved George R. Martin. He writes tomes. Patrick Rothfuss, you name it. A lot of my favorite authors, Robin Hobb, you name it. They write these, chonkers, right? And and people are reading them. So Jenny Wirtz, these thick tomes. But I'm thank you for writing those lengthy books, because for me, when I read your books, it just allows me to come completely immersed. Like, I can feel the worlds that you're building. It's tangible. Like I can taste it. I can smell it. I can touch it. Like that. That's what I love about reading books like yours. That I just lose myself in the books for however long, because you've done such an amazing job of building that world. That to me never feels dense. It just feels like I'm somewhere else, like as if I've traveled to another country and here I am. So.
I think that's probably how I end up with these big long stories, because I want to know everything too. And so once I know everything, then it just kind of bleeds in and I can't seem to cut it back. But then, I have to read the darn thing about 100,000 times just to get it ready. So I might as well enjoy it. And then I think it's the same for you, Angela, where I've watched it happen, where you're like, oh no, this person is interesting. I guess I'm going to have to.
As soon as they get a name and they're like, oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, no. But I mean, we're writing epic fantasy and you are building a world, and it's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, some people can do it in a really small amount of space. And I think when that happens, it's incredible. But also, it just depends on the idea that you have to tell.
Yeah.
How some ideas are told best in a short amount,
Yeah.
small. And some of them need more room to be developed and stuff. And so I don't like um, basing my reading on the length of a book. I like reading at all kinds of different lengths. Um,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I think when writers lean on their strengths and their passions, those are always the books that really are most memorable to me. And certainly there are writers that are able to write a really amazing short novel. Um, and I love them, but I think if I tried to tell the same story,
Yeah.
it would end up bigger, because I'm just so curious about these ideas that I have access to.
Well, that's happened in Smugglers. When I was writing Smuggler's Fortune, I thought I was trying to write a 15,000 word reader magnet, and
43,000 words.
yeah, and it turned out like 45 or 43 or something like that. And then yeah, so and the only reason it stayed at that length though is because it was four characters. It was a straight linear plot. It went from one to the place to another fairly quickly. It's really fast paced. And not every book can be that way. If you're interested in telling a story about more people, or like me, I like twisty plots and stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to give that in big worlds. I like big worlds too. And
Yeah,
sometimes you
lots
do
of culture and lots of
Right.
eating.
lots of food. Yeah, you need some
Yeah.
space for the food.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it's the stuff I like to read, and that's what it all comes back to. Like Krystal was saying, when you're following your passion, and I think that comes through for readers,
Yeah.
that they can tell that you're writing something that you're passionate about, instead of like just chopping things up arbitrarily because you wanted to hit a word count,
Yeah.
or writing something because you thought that you ought to write it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's-
Yeah, we do, and as you both pointed out, we don't have those constraints necessarily when we're self-published, and that's part of the
Right.
beauty of it, the freedom to do that. And I think in a couple of these page touring podcasts, Steve and I, we've had lengthy discussions after the podcast. That a lot of us talking that, that freedom is something that, like for me personally, I don't know if I'm willing to trade.
Yeah.
Right.
That to have that latitude and what it means to me personally, because invariably someone would definitely try and I don't think I could write what I write. I don't think a traditional publisher would touch what I write, specifically with what I write, with a flawed main character who's bigoted and racist and homophobic. And I remember reading an article about from a publishing executive, a traditionally published executive, saying, we can't sell an unlikable character. We can't do that. Although I've seen it done in the traditional world.
Yeah. I think generally though, when it's done, it's somebody who's got a few books under their belt, and so the publishers trust them. And when you're going out on a limb and you're trying new things, although it's hard to say exactly, because maybe you'd get an editor that understands what you're trying to say. So but it's such a weird feeling of just putting your fate into somebody else's control. To me, I think I would have a hard time with it. I'm very controlling, I've learned.
And I see so many people who are very discouraged, like they keep trying, they're writing what they want to write, and they keep trying, they send it off to agents, and it's getting rejected, and they're like, well, then I'll just put it away. And I didn't want to put my characters away. These are the people I wanted to write about. And the idea that I could do what I wanted to do was kind of a revelation too, because when I started, I kind of assumed that I would go the trad route. And then because that's what I had been doing before I stopped to, raise a bunch of kids. But then to think, okay, I can write books at the length that I want to write them at. I can tell the stories I want to tell. I can, make these kind of weird genre combining stories, and have my characters the way I want to tell them. it was really liberating, but also scary in a way because you're not
The
sure,
buck
like,
stops.
right?
Yeah.
Because I guess it's like we were talking about validation, but it's kind of scary taking responsibility for all that. You're like, well, I like to read this stuff, but maybe I'm the only person who likes to read this. I mean, that's never true, but
Yeah.
it's something that you could tell yourself, like, maybe I'm the only person who likes this specific. I'm a like genre of one, but that's not true. There's an audience for every book out there.
Yeah, it's a very scary, and I think that's what really, to be honest, if I'm scared about the trad industry is that, there's so many success stories from indies who've made that transition, and then for as many of those, there's the story that make you quick in your boots, and I use the example of Michael R. Fletcher, and a brilliant, brilliant writer, phenomenal writer who is now one of the top, indie writers out there, and who published, who got the big contract, and made it, and the book received critical acclaim, and it's a great book, Beyond Redemption, and I read it recently, loved it, it's phenomenal, and that HarperCollins didn't keep him, and we have the distinct advantage of, as long as we want to keep those books up on Amazon or wherever, they're going to be there, right? Unless Amazon changes their rules, like we don't have to worry about our books going out of print. We don't have to worry about like there's so many things that we don't have to cope with, being indies, and I don't know if I can't really foresee myself giving that. It's weird to think about security as an indie. Most people think about traditionally published as security, but I feel like I have security being an indie author, that I want what I write. No one's ever gonna take my books out of print. No one's gonna cancel my contract. If I don't earn out in all my books, that's okay. Like, all these things you don't have to worry about with. So I don't know. Those are just some things I think about. But again, like as Angela said, it doesn't mean that never say never, and as I think Krystal said that as well. But right now, I don't think it's, at least with this series, I don't think it's in the cards. So but we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. So
hopefully good things happen for you. I think you are telling good stories, and you sell yourself short, my friend.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored. But especially that's high praise coming from someone I immensely respect. So thank you.
I'm very bad at taking compliments. I always make the weirdest faces.
Yeah, sorry, Steve, go ahead.
She'll put it right in around here because we're all the same. We're bad about compliments.
Yeah,
I think we're but it's as you both highlighted, the writing community is always there to back us up, and that's a really good feeling, and certainly they've got me through a lot of tough moments, and I've had a lot of really supportive conversations, especially with Krystal, that have definitely been there to bolster me when things are tough. So thank you for that. And these little support groups that we formulate, and these little groups you formulate, definitely wouldn't be doing it without them, right? It makes it worthwhile. When I think when you both talked about writing not being a solitary thing, it's leaning on people for all kinds of advice, whether it's editing or how to navigate Amazon, or like so many aspects, getting the right cover artists, so many aspects that just you when you think about how what it goes into actually getting your book to the finish line. If when you write that acknowledgement page, most of us are usually thinking about, wow, this wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for so and so and so and so and so and so input and influence. And it's kind of phenomenal when you think about that saying, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to write a book to get it published, right?
And it's always funny to me, like to sit back and think about the connections and how random they are, and yet how it seems like we are delivered exactly the right people at exactly the right moment for no reason except because we were out in the world waiting. You know, yeah. I think if you have a little bit of faith in the impossible, you can make magic.
As fantasy writers, we should have that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
That was that was one of the things I was afraid of when I started actually writing. That it was that because I didn't know anybody, or I didn't know a lot of people, and I thought, oh, how will I do this myself? And that fear was foundless, because the community, the writing community is great, and like there are people out there, and all you have to do is just put yourself out and and you'll yeah, it's like-minded people kind of attract each other, and you kind of congregate together, and it'll happen. It's so now when I write my acknowledgments, I think sometimes I think about that. I was like, wow, I didn't think, because I would read people's acknowledgments pages, and I was like, there's no way I'll ever know this many people, and now I get to write these acknowledgement pages, and that makes me happy. So
yeah.
On that note, I want to also take some time out, especially Steve. We talked about this a lot last podcast, that booktubers, especially in this era of the pandemic, where we've lost, we're just getting back, book conventions, physical book fairs, book signings, and all this stuff. Booktubers have really kind of almost stepped in to fill the gap in that void, to really help get our works out there. And Steve, thank you so much for all you do, and those like you, with promoting our works, and interviewing authors, and getting the word out there. So thank you, my friend, for what you do. It's invaluable.
I definitely agree. Like, none of us would be here talking about any of this without readers, and without bloggers, and the booktubers, and just like kind of, no writer is an island, to where we can write to our heart's content, but if there's nobody there waiting to read, then we don't get very far. And I mean, certainly there's value in writing just for ourselves, but then once we go out into the world, it's for people. So
exactly. So thank you, Steve.
That's off to you.
Thank you. My pleasure. I have a question for all of you. Is I always think it's interesting how everyone has a different definition of the term grimdark, and some people don't think it's even I know that you've probably been asked this 1,000 times, but I want to make a video about this, but everyone's different interpretations and everyone's different definitions. So what is everyone's definition? What are the trademarks, or what are the key themes, or what makes a book or a story grimdark, in your opinion?
I'll let Angela and Krystal answer them.
I wasn't necessarily sure if I was even writing grimdark, especially because I was friends with Clayton, and I still am friends with Clayton, and his books definitely clear that bar. And I remember talking to him a few times, going like, what I'm writing isn't that dark, is it? Like, there's no way. Like, if I call this grimdark, people are going to be disappointed, because it's not there. But I've hit a readership, and I've learned that actually it is quite dark. Oops, I didn't know. And I think grimdark is built kind of on systems that support the difficulty and the bleakness and the ugliness, and so whether or not the characters are morally gray is kind of a sliding scale, and whether or not it's super violent is a sliding scale. But it feels like what they're fighting against, if it's a big bad evil that's very contained, it's not grimdark. But if they're fighting against humanity's darkest nature in a way that's really widespread, it starts to fall into that category where grimdark is a place where people kind of make eye contact with how ugly the average person is capable of being, and ask some pretty uncomfortable questions. And I think, and so it's a spectrum, and some of us, and Fortune's Fool is really close to the far end of the spectrum, where it's starting to toe the line a little bit, but it's kind of hard. Nobody seems to really agree. And then you get into me at Brightwash, where the system is very oppressive and very bleak, and energy units, but there's still hope and there's still a lot of love. And then you get into Clayton Snyder's work, and certainly he flirts with the idea of hope, but man, you really got to work for it, and you've got to suffer a lot to get it. And so I think grimdark is built on the wider system of how hard life can be, and that's not to say that other genres don't. It's just, I think it's an important theme, a core value of the genre that makes it slide into some uncomfortable things for people. So if Angela, you have anything to add?
No, I mean, because grimdark it's really hard to kind of, like you get 10 people together who write dark fantasy, and they're all going to have different definitions for it. And like Krystal said, a lot of times, like when I was writing Fortune's Fool, and after it came out, I would say it's not that dark, is it? And people would be like, yes, there are those things in it that are very dark, Angela. But I do think that it has something to do, probably because you can have morally gray characters, you can have grimy worlds, you can have all that, and you can still have them in classic fantasy or high fantasy. And I think I don't know, but I'm sort of leaning toward a definition where it has to do, like Krystal said, with the institutions and the systemic nature of the world, where it's just the bleakness kind of through it, and the characters may not have a lot of agency to change that. So they're sort of working towards something, maybe, but what they're working but what they're working toward may not lead to like the standard, classic fantasy happy ending, or a happy for now ending. Even it may be much more conflicted, so that you're looking at, like what the choices the characters make, where you're trying to figure out where the grayness comes in. They're not black and white. They're not definitively good or bad. They're some sort of mix and dependent on, circumstance. So I think that people often they kind of confuse grimdark with things that are really violent, or stories that have just a bunch of awful people in them. And certainly I think some grimdark books can have that, but I don't think that that's really what the subgenre is all about. It's a certain set of books are like that, but they don't define grimdark.
Yeah, it's the spectrum, right? Like there are authors doing that, and they're saying some really poignant things, but there's also like there's others in the genre that are saying kind of the same things but with slightly different tools. And I think I sometimes I wonder if it's something about fantasy, because certainly I've read books that are contemporary. I really like thrillers and mystery novels. Dennis Lehane is a fantastic writer, and nothing I've ever read in fantasy approaches the themes that Dennis Lehane tries to tackle in Boston, like in the real world. And so I think the conversation came about because fantasy had a tendency to be more escapist.
Mhm.
And then at some point, writers started saying, "Well, hang on, what else can we say?" And and the escapist stuff is great, and but I think it's just a strange conversation for me to watch as somebody who reads so many different genres, because like I said, like I've read stuff about real history that's much worse than anything that some people have classified as grimdark novels. So that's probably another reason why I thought, oh, Brightwash isn't that bad. Portia's Fool isn't that bad. Although your next one is I think it's on a similar level as
Yeah, it may go over the line into grimdark.
it it is.
Yeah,
I
it's
think too that it's one of those things where you write a book and then people categorize it however they categorize it,
Yeah.
So you put it out and you can try to market it like, okay, I think it's about these things, and then people pick it up, and if people will tell, and then you'll see it in reviews, like they'll pick up on the thing, and you're like, oh, okay, so that's really what my book is. So
Yeah, I think it's hard for us as writers to know what we've done until we see people interacting with it. And I do wonder if that's part of why there's a disconnect in the community where readers are telling us, "Hey, are you okay?" And we're going, "What? It's fine. You're fine. It's fine. It's not that dark. It's fine." And I think that's why fantasy struggles so much, because readers are wondering what's up with grimdark writers, and we're like, it's fine.
Yeah, it's crazy, and two parts to my response. And I wish I could attribute it to the right Krystal and Angela. So Michael R. Fletcher, again, probably widely known as, there was, and I'm trying to remember whether it was Grimdark Magazine voted. It was Mark. It was a Mark Lawrence.
Mark Lawrence.
Where he was voted as his book was the grimdarkest of grimdark book out there. He did a poll, and Fletch came up as that. But Fletch put out an interesting, and forgive me, and I don't remember if it was a tweet or Fletch did it could have been an article, and he said basically he used the analogy of in fantasy common fantasy trope is that there's always an inn. You show up at a tavern or inn, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he said something like basically, high fantasy is when the barmaid is buxom and gorgeous, and the hero has washboard abs, and he's everything's perfect, and then then there's like dark fantasy where like things are there's maybe the slosh, the beer sloshed on the counter, and maybe the person isn't in that good shape and they're a bit troubled and all. But then grimdark is like the doors falling off the tavern, and it's full of rats, and the bartender pulls a dirk out and puts on the counter when they walk in to serve you a drink, and he was trying to illustrate that difference between
the systems,
the systems, like how people perceive it, that these worlds are so the opposite of being pristine, and but I think that for me, like, and I remember and I said this on a previous podcast, I remember, because I have this love-hate relationship with what a lot of people call grimdark, and at first I wouldn't read it because I thought I wouldn't enjoy it, and then I found myself as actually, even though first of all I realized that I had already read some books that were considered grimdark without really realizing they were grimdark. We were advertised that way. And second of all, it was actually Holly Tinsley's book. I said this on a previous podcast, that was my first real introduction to something that I knew was really grim, and I loved it. And she's also an SPFPO finalist currently. And I thought, okay, and it really gave me it opened my eyes to really what grimdark is, because although, for example, I know both your books are kind of market advertised as being like somewhat grimdark or dark fantasy. Certainly Krystal's with like Gaslamp grimdark. I didn't look at them that way. But the worst, the bottom of me is when a fellow writer who I respect immensely, said, "You write moral grimdark," and I'm like, "What?" I was so offended at first, right? Like, I don't write grimdark, and then no, you write moral grimdark. I was like, and then I sat down, and I thought about it. I'm like, oh, well, maybe I do, right? Because I write all about religious intolerance, racism, misogyny, homophobia. My character is extremely flawed and bigoted. And it's a first person POV. Like, yeah, I'm writing. It's what they said. What you're writing is moral grimdark. Like, oh, I guess so. So
yeah, you're talking about systems and how they, when they're built to oppress, then
yeah, exactly.
how do you overcome that? And I think that's something that grimdark is trying to ask. Like, how do you even find a happy ending in a world where the system is built to beat you down?
Yeah, and that is, I think, more and more, if I'm going to try and put, and I know it's not fair to put grimdark in a box. We all have our own boxes and our delineations of what grimdark is and isn't. If for my purposes, for PL Stewart's purposes, if I put grimdark in a box, it is exactly the definition that Krystal gave of, it's these systems that are very oppressive, dark. There's an element of the protagonist or people characters involved being unable to escape the bounds of this system. They're very confined and trapped within the system, and they either exploit the system. Maybe they're part of the actual system regime that's basically in charge of this oppressive system, or they're trying to escape it. And that's now how I'm starting to form my unique definition of what grimdark is, but that still doesn't cover everything, right? That still doesn't cover a good portion of the genre that doesn't fall into that category, but I have to acknowledge it's still grimdark. So again, it's very subjective, and but like Steve, that's an excellent question. And Steve, what do you think grimdark is, Steve? Like, what because for you, like, you're a horror, like, I think your first love is horror, and horror and grimdark have a lot of common elements. And you may find that something that I think is, oh my god, that's dark, you're like, well, not really, but you know what I mean? Like, how do you define grimdark? Like, oh, I can't hear you. So,
What about now?
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, my thing was on. I've been trying to collect my thoughts on this one for a while.
I can hear you, but just maybe closer to the mic.
Yeah, it's weird. Can you hear me now?
Still a bit fuzzy, but yeah.
Be right back.
Okay. Yeah,
he was muted for too long.
yeah, maybe, but yeah, it's just funny how this whole grimdark discussion, like, you see these conversations, especially on Twitter. It's like, wow. So there he is.
What about now?
Bit better.
Better? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what's going on with my mic. It's acting weird. But for me, the main theme for grimdark has been consequences. Is the main thing that I've kind of wrapped my head around. Is everything there's consequences to every action, and the bad things that happen, there'll be consequences later for it. So that's the main thing. I've been trying to write down some things, but that's the first thing that came to mind. And I actually got that from Peter McLean. Is when I asked him, he said consequences. That's always kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, that's probably a good point, because even if you're trying to make a good choice, there are consequences for people that maybe you didn't intend and maybe you didn't even see. That's a good.
Yeah, and I think that leads to like the kind of more realism type styles that you kind of see in grimdark, like as opposed to like classic fantasy where you can have battles and stuff and a lot of people die, or and the hero jumps up after taking a wound and the next day they're fine, and that doesn't happen so much in grimdark. Like those things have consequences, like you said. Like they're more like what would go on if that happened in the real world, in like reality, and so it's less escapist, I guess, and more trying to deal with the subject matter that comes up that's maybe difficult to grapple with, but it's trying to do it in a way that lets people process that, I guess, instead of kind of just sweeping it under the rug, I suppose.
Yeah, and Grimdark also, I think, was the first type of fantasy to deal with the emotional consequences, PTSD. How people feel emotion in reaction to a fight or a battle, or because the classic fantasy tended not to delve into that aspect,
Yeah.
right? It didn't talk about the hero who's traumatized after the battle for days, or who sees the ghosts of the people he slew, or grim dark really gets into that element of and again, like when I think about Angela's books, when I think about Krystal's books, like Kira specifically is traumatized by not only the actions that basically lead up to her losing her arm, right? I don't want to give any spoilers here,
Yeah.
but she's traumatized by that entire,
Yeah.
and it shapes her entire existence. And obviously Tashue, grapples with all the consequences of him being in the position he's in, and what that means for his family, what that means for his romantic relationships, what that means for like every aspect of his life. And you classic high fantasy, you don't get that element is not as much of a factor. Certainly it's never it's the extrapolation, the in-depth dive isn't there about
I think
that
I
stuff.
think we're starting to see more of it, and like, which it's an interesting evolution to watch, where one genre kind of or one subgenre starts to try to talk about a thing, and then other genres are kind of following along, and then they move the conversation around. So it's really interesting. I think I lost my train of thought, but yeah, it's not something that I saw in fantasy 30 years ago so much, but it's something that I started to see when I was reading David Gemmell, and then it's something that I also saw when I came back to fantasy with Anthony Ryan and Brian Stabley. Although I think some people classify those two gentlemen as grimdark, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. But certainly, yeah, there seems to be an entire shift in SFF where the stories are starting to resonate on a more human level and less about escapism, and even the ones that are escapist, like Quen's novel Miss Percy is cozy and light and escapist, but even there she is grappling with some big questions about life and stuff. I can't so yeah, but then yeah, I think you're right to say that grimdark started to ask those questions, and then a lot of other fantasies started to follow in the footsteps. And certainly, maybe it's kind of a self-selecting thing where those are the stories that I remember the most. But yeah, that's the end of my babbling.
Yeah, and oh, sorry, I'll get to that after this question there. Sorry, Steve.
I just said all running is an act of magic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that now I've reached a point in my life where, as painful as it might be sometimes, I need books that resonate with me. Yeah, I can read books for pure escapism, and we talked about this on the previous podcast with Lana and Taylor and Zamil, that the Travis Baldry stuff, I'm dying to read it. The Latte's book, like, that sounds fantastic. I'm looking for it. I'm sure it sounds like light reading, and although I'm who knows, he very well may tackle some compelling and thought-provoking things, but I find that what I gravitate towards now are books that resonate with me long after I close the book and finish the last page. And and I can definitely say that about your books, both of your books specifically, that afterwards I had to sit down and go, wow, and just kind of absorb it and take it in. It takes a while to write the review and it's not because the books are long. It's because you're trying to process and do justice to all the facets that really, really get you and really hit you in the feels. And you want to do justice to that, and it's but those are kind of books that I crave.
Yeah.
Right, as much as I like reading books that it's quick, it's it's fast, it's paced, and it's done, and it's great, and that was a great book, and it may still be a great book. It's just a different kind of great book.
Yeah.
But I feel that, like as Krystal said, pacing and all that. Yeah, okay. But I want those books that not only that I am immersed in, but that afterwards I remember they've made an impact on me. Like there's like a piece of me left in that book, right? Or the author has imprinted a piece of them in me in terms of what they're trying to say, right? Because I believe, without speaking for both of you, I know that's how I write. I think, having had conversations, especially with Krystal, and obviously I'm sure Angela feels the same way, that we leave so many pieces of ourselves in these books.
Yeah.
There's so much of a trail of our own, foibles and idiosyncrasies and mannerisms and faults and positive things, and we just leave this trail, that these breadcrumbs that really only we see. The reader will certainly pick up on them, but may not attribute it to us directly. But there's parts of us, usually, or people we know, or that are in there, and they come out consciously or subconsciously. And I think that's, for us as writers, that what makes our book so dear to us, because of those pieces that we leave in there. Writing a book is a real emotional journey, and after you're finished, you're like, wow. Like sometimes I go back now, I read my book, I'm like, holy moly, I wrote that, eh? Wow, that's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
But I don't regret it whatsoever. And I think for me, that very much makes a book worthwhile reading these days. When I have that after close plays, I'm like, wow, whew, that was, yeah.
That was a journey. Yeah. That. Yeah, I relate. And I mean, I read, I just finished Carissa Broadbent's book, and hers is much lighter, and it's very, it's really beautifully done. It's a great romantic fantasy, and she really treads the line between coming over into the darkness, but not quite. So I wouldn't classify it as grimdark. Certainly, it's more of a lighter. I don't even want to say it's light, because it deals with some really heavy themes as well. But that one left an impact on me, on how she balanced that. There's an awareness from that narrative that yes, she knows that her main character has gone through a lot, but she delivers it a little bit more gently than I would have, and she did it really well. It's maybe like a step or two lighter than Fortune's Fool. Speaking of the spectrum, but it was brilliantly done. So yeah, certainly it's hard to identify exactly what it is that makes a book so special to me personally as a reader, but there is definitely that willingness to get really personal. That always stays with me.
Yeah, and the characters, like if a writer, I think you can tell when the writers are treating their characters as real people. And so I think that whether the book's lighter or darker, I just want to see a certain honesty in dealing with the characters and who they are and their emotions and relationships, whatever they are. And I think that's what I guess I really get attached to the characters more than I do the names of the story, because a lot of times I'll just totally forget the plots after I read the books, but the characters will stick with me for a long time. So
yeah, I totally agree. I'm very much, we talked about that with Thomas and Mark, and the three of us definitely agreed on that. And it's the kind of books we write where, if you give me immersive world building and great character development, there's a lot of things that I can get along without in a book, but those are the two things that I need for you to really hook me in a book. I've read books that are great with, the action scenes and battle scenes and, other things, and it's like this fast paced, thrilling plot, and it's just, page turner. But I've a lot of the books I've liked don't have that in the degree that other ones do. Like I think I use the analogy of like Evan Winter, who's a great writer, and he does have great world building, but his trademark is these visceral battle scenes that just like, it's from battle scene to battle scene to battle scene to battle scene, and you can read those books and it's an adrenaline rush, and it's not that he doesn't have great world building. He does. I don't want to take that away from him, but it's just that the focus becomes that action. And I think for me, I while his books have resonated with me, it's the books that don't have that nonstop, and just like that really get to me, like your books, right? That have, there's action elements, but it's not, I can sit back and just kind of smell the roses, enjoy the spices in the market, and Angela's book, right? And all the different scents, and smell the smell of smoke and what the whiskey tastes like in Krystal's book. And those are the things that, like I said, I if you ask me about, as great a writer as Evan Winter is, if you ask me about some of the battle scenes, I remember they were visceral and they're amazing, and I got a thrill, but I can't describe everything about them in my mind right now, but I can describe a lot of those elements in terms of world building and the character development, and how I felt when Kira or Tashaway had this really heart-wrenching moment, right? Like I can tell you what that passage was, almost, but not verbatim, but I can tell you how I felt like inside, right? How it made me feel. So, that's what I crave. So
we're definitely on the same page, which is probably why we're all talking together at this moment.
But well, I know we're running close to the 2-hour mark. Although I could literally sit down and talk to you guys forever. It's more for the purposes of the length of the broadcast. So, and I'm sure we might have a few comments after we're done. But I just want to thank you two so much for joining us, taking time out of your holiday weekend to do this and spending it with your families. I know you both have large families, and there's a lot of things you were doing, and you're both very busy besides everything else you're doing with your writing. And thank you so much for being such upstanding members of the writing community, and so supportive, and just honored to know you. And all the best with both of your writing, obviously, and Krystal in particular with the current SPFBO finals, and Angela with your upcoming works, and Krystal too. And just thank you for coming, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having us on.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, can you ladies let us know where's the best place to reach you, your social media preferred platforms, your websites, things like that before we wrap up.
You can go first this time, Krystal.
Okay. I'm most available on Twitter. It's just at Krystal Matar, and then I have a website that I don't update very often at krystalmatar.com. I'm also on Instagram, but not very much, and it's the same Krystal Matar. I'm using that unusual name to its fullest potential. I think that's about it for me. Yeah,
and I have a website that I also don't update very much. It's angelaboord.com, and you can sign up for my newsletter there, though, and I do try to keep up with my newsletter. It's supposed to come out monthly. Sometimes I don't hit quite monthly, but it's close. And then I'm on Twitter as Angela Boord too, and that's pretty much it. I would like to do more social media, but it seems like Twitter is about all that I can handle sometimes. So.
It's a handful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Steve, what about you? What are your where can we get a hold of you, and what are your preferred platforms?
You can find we actually just changed the website to pagechewing.com. So,
Okay.
and it can be found on Twitter, and also I like to use Vero because there's no algorithm, and you see people that you actually follow on your timeline, and it's kind of nice. So I enjoy.
Oh yes, I remember you tweeted about that not too long ago, and then I promptly forgot to check it out. So this is my reminder.
Yeah, I did enjoy that because it seems like it's more relaxing, and it's a great platform, but not many people use it, which is the bummer. But it's relaxing. So that's the best place to find me, though, and of course here on YouTube. But hope you can hear me okay. I know my mic's been giving me grief tonight, but thanks everyone thank you so much, Angela and Krystal, for joining us. And of course, PL, being wonderful as usual.
Thank you so much,
everybody, for coming by, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.